Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. There's no doubt there's been a lot of talk around the shortage of workers in manufacturing. It's compounding. We've talked about it in previous episodes. More data is coming out. It's a concern. It's going to get worse before it gets better. And we know that in manufacturing, the owners, the corporations need the people now more than the people need the corporations. There's a lot of options out there. But there's this untapped market out there of women in manufacturing. And we've talked about this extensively on mindfulness manufacturing, but I still need some help. I think as a community, we need some help. And I brought on an expert today, Nicole Provonchee. She works internationally with women professionals, executive coaching. She speaks all over to audiences on this topic. She lives in Nashville, Tennessee. She's got 2 kids of her own, and she's personally helped me. So, Nicole, how can we help manufacturing and getting women on board to help us make us a better industry?
Well, thanks for inviting me, Trevor. I believe in prep for this, you'd shared some of the statistics about manufacturing and women in manufacturing. And I don't know if you want to share some of those now, but the numbers are pretty low.
Yeah. So we know that 47% of the total workforce involves women, and they're only making up 30% in the US for people working in manufacturing. And that's actually less than what it was in the 1990s. So we're not even going in the right direction. I know I've shared more of my Canadian stats where in the 80s, they were around 27, 28%, and they're about the same now. So in order to get a different result, you got to do something different. That's insanity, or you get the same result. We know we want to keep manufacturing in North America. And hey, I'm a white guy, middle-aged. I have a lot of friends that kind of look like me and talk like me. And I know that it's bigger than that. And what do we got to do different?
I think there's a lot of talk out there about diversity and inclusion when it comes to a range of aspects of humans. And I think with women specifically, and I'm talking in generalities, which is always very dangerous, but I think with women specifically, the issues that I see that are keeping people out of certain professions are, and it's really driving this great resignation that we're seeing, is the lack of flexibility in the workplace. And I think that would be a real challenge in manufacturing because we've got logistical things that have to happen, right? If I don't show up to work, that is a direct impact on the ability for something to get completed. And so when I think about that environment and that industry, and one of the largest clients that I have is in manufacturing, one of the challenges that they've had is recruiting women and retaining women when there's an environment that lacks flexibility, because oftentimes the woman is the main caretaker if there are any children. They may be the main caretaker for their own parents as well as to their spouse's parents. And so sometimes their life just requires a bit more flexibility for doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, sick kids, their own illnesses, taking parents to doctors. So I think that's one of the big challenges that has to be addressed in all parts of our society, but especially in the manufacturing areas. How can we help people live the lives that they have with the needs that they have and also flourish in the workplace?
Yeah, this is confusing for me because when I look at it as a engineering mind, I'm just like, okay, I've got a manufacturing line, and I know from a capital standpoint, I want that to run, 24/7, at least 24/5. I want to utilize that equipment, and I just want people to show up, 8 hours, be there at 7, leave at 3, don't miss any days. So how does that flexibility work? Because the reality is, yeah, it is changing. And I remember going for a job interview and which I didn't even have to work there. It was more of a traveling job. And they're like, no, you have to live right here if you want this job. And I'm like, well, I don't even have to really be here that much. Well, no, that's a requirement. If you take the job, you got to move here. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But I mean, is it any more ridiculous than we're saying, hey, we have people aging. You got to take care of your parents. We got to take care of kids. We got a lot of different things, but we have no flexibility.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge is that how do you, when you've set up the mechanics of your organization, of your industry to be fairly rigid, and I'm not debating that, right? That's how it works, right? And then you take a sort of swath of individuals that oftentimes have the burden, for lack of a better term, of all of these external things, right? It's really hard to mesh those two puzzle pieces together. And so I think what we have to think about is changing the mindset of the organization. And I think this is coming to a head in so many different industries. It's not just manufacturing. I'm seeing it in financial services. I'm seeing it in healthcare, that if you don't have an environment that allows people to live the life that they have to live, not even that they want to live, but if my kid's sick and throwing up, I can't come to work, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so how do you create an environment where you allow typically the primary caregiver of children and aging parents to do the things they have to do and also make a living? It will require industries that have typically had a workforce that can be more rigid and doesn't have to worry about many of these things because there are females at home often taking care of these aspects. How do you change that mindset? How do you change the workflow? So either there's redundancies, which I know bring up expenses, or other things you can do to allow for that minor level of flexibility. And I want to be clear here, it's not that I need to be flexible every single day of the week. But I do think the challenge I'm seeing for women is that a lot of my clients is through the time of COVID, they've started to make different decisions about their careers when they're faced with an environment that doesn't allow them any flexibility, right? So I think it's fair for an organization to say, hey, I need a certain amount of notice, or we've got to talk about a coverage plan. Or if I'm working 7 to 3, is there anything I can do to make sure the doctor's appointments happen at 3:30? What I'm seeing happen a lot with my clients is they're starting to have dialogue. So I would say, Trevor, maybe the first place to start is for organizations to start to have dialogue about what does that flexibility look like? Because I find that most managers hear the word flexibility and they're just like, I just want everything to be fluid all the time. And that's not actually what we're asking for. I think what we're saying is that, if I wake up at 6:30 to go to my shift and my kid pukes on me, I'm clearly not going to be able to go to my shift because he's 3 and I got to deal with this 3-year-old that now can't go to daycare. So what do you do with that? And I think being able to have a conversation with your manager and talk through, what do I do with that? How does that work? What does that look like? I think that's the place to start, is allowing organizations to have sort of psychological safety around those conversations.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense of just having dialogue. So are we talking more of the pre-planned stuff, or is the issue more around the last minute stuff?
I think, Trevor, that's a great question. I would say it's probably both. That's a typical consultant answer, right? I think that you're always going to have the unexpected, right? I don't know how I think COVID's taught us that. Like, we're going to always have the unexpected. I think as much as possible, that's where the dialogue piece can come in. As much as possible, if you can plan I, as a woman, if I can get a great job in manufacturing and I have a boss and we can have a meaningful dialogue that says, you know what, I have to care for my aging parent, but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure my doctor's appointments are on Wednesdays because I don't work on Wednesdays, right? I think that would be a way that the organization and the employee can work together. Thinking through, how can I as an employee be the best employee I can be at work, but also be respectful of the fact that my employer has a line to run. Right. I think
Mm-hmm.
it goes both ways. One thing I think that can happen is that employers can, when they're initially talking to me, feel like they have to, be super flexible and bend. Well, it really goes both ways. The employee also has some accountability too. They need to understand that the organization doesn't, the machine may not run or the line may not run if they're not there. So they need to have a level of accountability around that. So I think it really is the employee and the employer working together as much as possible to have that open dialogue.
So do you see these dialogues like more in one-on-one formal settings? Is it more like a focus group, or where have you seen success? If I was an owner of a manufacturing plant, where would I start?
Another great question. I think that what I've seen at some of the larger organizations, so I work with a Fortune 50 manufacturer right now, and they started with focus groups because they simply couldn't have the conversation, one-on-one. It was just too challenging. And so they started with some focus groups. They named them something different, but they really tried to figure out what would increase the at all levels of diversity inclusion, like how can they get a more diverse workforce. So they were looking at all levels. And then what they tried to do is have meaningful change within the organization. So it's not really just putting a band-aid on it or whitewashing something. It really was trying to figure out how do they have meaningful change. And sometimes that meant they had to have trainings for their managers on how to have this conversation, right? And then they had to have trainings for the employees on what was the employee's role, right? Because it's not just all about, I want all kinds of flexibility so I can come and go as I please. There's a level of responsibility and having that conversation with both. So there was a level of training that they did for the managers to help them understand, how do I have a nuanced conversation? And those did occur one-on-one. And then how do I have, as an employee, understand that when I'm out, it does cause a ripple effect.
So does this sound so simple when you say it, right? Just have a conversation, figure out both sides of the equation. Because I think both sides are sometimes afraid to have that conversation because they're attached of, hey, I don't want to have all this dialogue. I want to get the lines running better. And I just want you to show up every day. So I'm going to put my head in the sand and just follow the current policy and pretend that times aren't changing and that there isn't this huge shortage, because over 21% over the medium is the pay rate in manufacturing to other industries. So this is an industry that when we're in it, we're making money. Individuals are making money. We can manufacture in North America and have good lives and not have to run into issues like we just did in the last couple of years of supply chain issues. Like, make it locally. I even see people trying to figure out how do they make it within their province or within their state, let alone country. So let's shift gears and talk about the leadership aspect. We know that 1 in 4 manufacturing leaders are women. So it's even less once we get there. And I can remember, Mike, the founder of this podcast with me, when we worked together, this is so embarrassing, but it was like, I remember having some women leaders, which I really struggled getting to perform where I kind of wanted, as just a results type person, not really too deep of a thinker. And then I turned into the bad cop and I'd make them cry, and then they'd go to Mike, and then he would make it a little bit better. But it was like, man, that's not a good story. I don't want to be the bad cop because I made someone cry. It's makes me want to go back to that person now. It's just like, how do we maybe lead different or project differently to get women in more leadership?
I think it's a big problem. I see it actually. I work a lot in the healthcare area, and the vast majority of the workforce in healthcare is female, right? So the nurses, the nurse managers, the people, the phlebotomists, even the housekeepers. A lot of those are women, but you don't see the women rise up organizationally in senior level positions at the same rate as men. You definitely don't see it with other minorities as well. So there is a similarity there in manufacturing as well as in other industries. Part of that is a supply chain issue, right? You got to have enough women in the organization to have women to promote. So certainly it goes back to sort of the recruitment of women and getting them in to the environment and getting them to stay, and then developing those women. One thing I think that I have seen organizations do well, and this one particular organization I work with, they actually contracted with an organization out of New York to have a leadership development program for women. And so they have 200 women in the organization that get nominated, and they go through a year-long program that's fully paid by the organization. And they really work on leadership development skills, and they're trying to cultivate and invest in those leaders so that those women will want to stay with the organization and be better leaders. And I think that what they're finding, and I think this was in some of the research that you have as well, Trevor, is that when we have more diverse viewpoints at the table, we actually see business performance go up. So it is very helpful to have people from all different backgrounds, come to and sit at the leadership table. But I think the only way to get women to the table is to recruit them early, so you have them, in the funnel to go up. And then, like you said earlier, maybe have some focus groups or try to understand when women are leaving, why are they leaving? Right. I consider myself a pragmatic feminist. And one of the things that I like to coach the women that I'm working on is we have to be better self advocates. So if I am in a workplace and I like the company and I like my boss, but something's not working for me, I need to advocate. I don't just need to be quiet and hope it gets fixed or be quiet and leave. I need to go in a very and there's lots of skills with how to do this, but go in and say, hey, you know what? Here's the challenge for me staying. I don't see this, or I need this, or I need to figure out how we can work together to get to a solution. So I also think that women have to step up and be better self advocates and articulate what they need to stay in the workforce so that the organization can at least have the opportunity to try and retain them.
What about, the different scenario? You've met Diana, and she worked for Mike, who we just talked about. And in that situation, he went to her and kind of said, have you considered this role? And she just hadn't, and really didn't see herself in that. And I watched Mike do that and thought, oh, if Mike didn't have that conversation, she wouldn't be in that role and she wouldn't be where she is today. And I kind of learned from him saying, okay, we got to be more intentional, have more of those conversations. Is that a big part of it? Because that was just something informally that I just learned, through the experience.
Yeah, no, you're dead on there. So one of the things that happens is women tend to overvalue expertise. So again, this is a generality, but there's a ton of research out there that says that women will apply for a job when they're about between 60 and 80% confident that they can do the job. So when I look at the job description for the job that I want to apply for, I have to meet 60 to 80% of that criteria. Men will apply to a job anywhere between 20 and 40% because they have the confidence to say, I'll figure the rest out. Well, women have the ability and should have the confidence to say, I can figure the rest out, but we're starting at such a higher place. So if you go, just figure out the math, right? So you have men that are coming in and saying, oh gosh, at 40%, I can do 40% of this job. I'm going to apply for the job. But women wait until they're at 60 or 80. We're just not even applying. So one of the things I do when I'm speaking with women and when I'm working with women is to say, hey, you know what? Lean in, just apply. You've all the skills that got you to this place will continue to help you to get to the next place. Have conversations with your boss about what's out there. What do they think that you could accomplish? I think it's wonderful that Mike did that. And I do think people in leadership positions, if you see a high potential employee, go and work with her and say, hey, I really see you're great at X, Y, and Z. Have you ever thought about in a year or two trying for ABC job? I think that's a wonderful way because women sometimes can get in their own way. Because culturally we're told that we really have to be excellent, right? We have to meet that 80% criteria before we apply for a job. And we need to be applying for jobs at much earlier confidence levels.
Where as males, you're saying just, hey, I'll fake it till I make it. I'll figure it out. I just want the position, and I'm not worried about whether I'm qualified.
I think it's confidence. I think they just feel like, hey, you know what? I can go figure that out. And a lot of times you can, right? If I look at the job and I'm like, well, I have the intelligence and the drive to figure out the vast majority of this. And I've got some of the components. I'm going to just go ahead and jump in and see what happens, right? I think men are more willing and our culture supports that at a higher level. Whereas women are more likely to go, I really think I need to have every bullet point on here. I can't tell you how many leaders I've worked with where they're like, yeah, but I don't have X, Y, and Z. And it's a 19-page, job description. I'm like, that's what's holding you back, this one bullet point. So I think women need to lean in earlier and try for some things. And because I do think that no matter what your gender is, if you work hard and you have the right mentorship and you have the right training, you can advance in your career. Women are oftentimes holding themselves back because we have this misguided belief that we have to be experts before we can move forward.
Yeah. And in most plants, I see quality leaders and I see HR leaders. But Diana's one of the exceptions. Is a shop floor can run a plant leader for a woman, which is a great example. And she's out helping other plants now. And obviously, women in manufacturing has 10,000 members from 2,000 companies. So that's a good outlet as well. I like what you're saying about the training program specifically, for women. I know there's some controversy of, well, then you're just going to try to fill those spots and fill a quota. And well, it's not about that. It's actually like I've felt it where I've made better decisions because I've been surrounded with people of different genders to help me have different perspectives, which has been a huge help. But the process usually goes, hey, there's a job opening coming up in leadership manufacturing. A job posting goes up. Everybody gets to see it. It's up from 1 week, usually goes up on a Tuesday, down on a Tuesday, and whoever applies, and we kind of go through it. So right at that stage there, like what could be happening different?
So I think if you really want to invest in female leaders, one, I would look at your recruitment tactics. So are you, let's think about external candidates first, right? So what are the approaches you're taking in your recruitment efforts? Are you contacting, is your job been posted at the Women in Manufacturing Association? Have you reached out to, is HR reaching out to any other organizations that might be working with women? Are they working with the local universities that might be graduating, or technical schools might be graduating women? Do they have a women's association? So thinking about all the creative ways externally, and then internally, having managers have conversations, right? I mean, the best person should get the job, but I think women sometimes opt out too early. So having managers do what Mike did, which said, hey, you know what, Nicole, I think you'd be great at this job. You know what, Diana, I think you'd be great at this job. And that's where I think that internally managers can really help sort of shift this tide, is to identify great talent and encourage people to take that first step. Diana actually, she and I had a conversation, and she was telling me about the challenges sometimes being on the shop floor, that she would have to prove herself. And I think that's a different challenge than what we're talking about women's confidence and trying to stay in the pipeline and move women up. But I do think we have to also address, culturally looking at an organization, are there stereotypes of women that are outdated, that maybe they can't be on the shop floor? Are there, do women feel like they have to work twice as hard to prove themselves? And that's a much, much harder cultural systemic change that's going to take time. And I think one of the ways it changes is that more people like Diana are on the shop floor, and people see her and it becomes normal, right? She's not the only woman on the floor. She's just Diana on the floor.
Yeah, when you see people like you doing that, it just makes it able to picture yourself there.
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the things that women in manufacturing do well. They have a podcast. They highlight different people that have been successful. That's a good point. So maybe people within their own organizations can just point that out, right? And just kind of like, make that recognition. So I'm hearing two things, right? You got the internal of that job posting's up. How can we make sure that, hey, you're all candidates for this position and you got to apply. So there's that one-on-one conversations. But then as well, it's filling that pipeline. So if I've only got 30% women in the plant and I'm 1 in 4 leaders, I mean, that's only a 5% difference. So we really kind of level that out, because it isn't like we've got 50-pound rails that everyone's got to pick up, every 10 minutes. Like, these are ergonomic situations now where women can weld as fast as men, and really sometimes better, more times better, probably, or more often. So yeah, interesting. What haven't I asked, Nicole? What do I need to hear? What do our
I think
listeners need to hear, be left with today?
I think you're asking a lot of the right questions. I really think that it comes down to thinking about why you want to have some kind of gender equity program, right? Or looking at why you want women in your workplace. And I can make a case for it, but I think organizationally, what are the business drivers for it? So you've brought up several. One, I think women bring some different perspectives, but two, you're going to have a workforce shortage. You literally need women to come and work in your organization because you need more bodies, more people, more minds to move the organization forward. And so I think you've got to figure out what is the core business driver? Why do you want to have this effort? And then think about what you're willing to change within your organization to get there. right? So there's going to be some small changes like helping managers have conversations. There might be some bigger changes like creating a partnership with the Women in Manufacturing Association. But I think getting clear about why you want to do this, and then thinking about what are the systems and processes and training we need to put in place so that we can really make a fundamental difference. It's not a Band-Aid. I think that's the hardest part, is that this isn't a quick fix. This is a long-term systemic change. And I think it's only going to be more challenging because the women I'm working with do feel empowered that they have choices. So if manufacturing really wants to get out there and recruit women, they're going to have to really examine what are the barriers keeping women out and what are the barriers keeping women from moving forward.
This is a 30-minute podcast. We're supposed to just like give the quick fix here, Nicole.
I'm sorry. Bad news. Yes.
Man, we got to start with recruiting and way down at that end and fill the pipeline and whew. But
yeah,
hey,
I know.
Taking it back to Simon Sinek and starts with why we got to be doing it for the right reasons, right? It's about getting the best person for the role. It's just, we just know from the math, we're not getting the best person in the role. We're getting who's there today. And I just had some significant emotional events in my life that when Naomi came to my office and she was in the office there and came to me just saying, hey, you just really pissed off all those people. I'm like, what are you talking about? She was just more aware than me. And it's like, that was huge. And if she wasn't there, then we just keep on beating the drum and pounding the parts, and all of a sudden a few more people quit and a few more people don't apply. And now we don't have enough people to run because Trevor just kept his head in the sand.
And we need all kinds of people. I think you're bringing a great example of, we need Trevors, right? We need sensitive Trevors who also are self-aware, right? But we need people that are focused on moving the organization forward and have that strong drive. I think it's acknowledging that we actually need a very diverse set of skills to really compete in the current marketplace. And then how do we get the people in, and then how do we keep them? And I think that's the biggest challenge, is we can't look at it as binary, like I have to make this line run, like the scenario you were talking about, and there is one way to do it and one model to do it. You've got to think about if you've got a workforce that may require an additional level of flexibility. It's not pure flexibility. How can you adapt so that you can attract and retain that female workforce? And I think it's a big question for manufacturing, but it's one that they're going to have to start answering if they want to recruit and then retain women in the workplace.
Hey, we started this podcast just to be a little more present, a little more aware, mindful of, hey, it's happening all around us. We're trying to keep more people in our organization, bring more people to our organization. So, Nicole, I think you left some big picture thoughts on what we need to do kind of from the pipeline standpoint. But I think, hey, every listener right now can end this podcast and just go have a conversation with one person. And I think it comes back to what you started with, dialogue. And it's a privilege to have this podcast. It's a huge, humbling following that I see people listening. And it brings me joy to know that, hey, there will be people who have a conversation because you came on today, Nicole. So thanks for sharing, and I appreciate what you do.
Thank you, Trevor. This was fun.
Hey, folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.